Jaguar is one of the most storied automakers in history since their inception all the way back in 1935. It's a brand that embraces opulence and luxury, but it's one that still has an edge to it. In a world where James Bond, the hero of the story, drives an Aston, the villain should be driving a Jag. And perhaps the most villainous, baddest Jags of all time are the ones crafted by Lister. Specifically the cars that were built on the XJS platform. Lister took these pretty gentlemen's Grand Tourers and tore them apart, rebuilding them into what might be the most insane GT cars to ever come out of England. Fender flares, a stroker kit, and 2 superchargers were just par for the course in creating Lister's ultimate performance Jag, the maniacal 200-mile-per-hour Lister Le Mans. And its lineage could be traced all the way back to 1954 with a man named Brian Lister. Out of a modest ironworks in Cambridge, Brian Lister set about building race cars that could punch well above their weight class. He looked towards brands like Cooper for inspiration, which was a young British company that had made waves after the war by putting the engine behind the driver in their nimble, chain-driven 500cc race cars. While the mid-engine layout was not entirely new, Cooper had shown how effective it could be, winning race after race and making it accessible to a new generation of privateer racers. Lister sought to follow in the footsteps of Cooper in his own spin by creating his own lightweight race cars. With Archie Scott Brown at the wheel, Lister's new cars soared into the spotlight, grabbing wins and pushing for even greater performance. Over time, with these initial Lister race cars, MG power plants gave way to larger, more powerful Bristol engines, and then finally, the ferocious Jaguar inline sixes, as the first real connection points between the Lister name and Jaguar. Lister's rounded and aggressive knobbly race cars, as they were called, became icons of British motorsport, even after tragedy and rapidly advancing tech forced Lister to retreat from the front line of racing in 1959. Their legacy and innovation of brute force remained, and it set the stage for the monstrous Lister Le Mans cars just decades later in a rather triumphant return, which began in the mid to late 1980s when the Lister name was acquired by Lawrence Pierce, the mad lad who sought to reinvigorate the historic Lister brand with a 20th century Jaguar-based flair. Now, Lister would eventually go on to build their very own Jaguar-powered road car in the 90s called the Lister Storm, which actually had a very successful racing career under Pierce's tenure, winning the FIA GT Championship and the British GT Championship around the turn of the century, besting cars like the McLaren F1 GTR and the Porsche 911 GT1s, which was an insane feat for such a low-volume manufacturer like Lister. But that success would not have been possible without the cars that came at the beginning of Pierce's tenure with Lister, their heavily modified Jaguar XJSs. These cars were coming out right at the height of what is the so-called turnkey tuner era, where AMG was building the iconic Hammer cars, Saleen was taking over the Mustang world, and companies like Gambala and Strosek were building some of the most out-of-this-world Porsches. But Lister takes the cake for building the craziest performer of the era. Where AMG was taking Mercedes cars and pouring kerosene onto the fire, so to speak, Lister was dropping an atom bomb onto it. Their full XJS conversions came in different forms, but make no mistake, no matter which one you got, these cars were only reserved for the most well-off of individuals, with price tags soaring to over £100,000 in the mid-80s, at a time when the Ferrari 308 sold for just $45,000 US. Lister partnered with WP Automotive and BLE Automotive to completely re-engineer Jaguar's Grand Touring-focused XJS. And the heart of this transformation was a series of heavily reworked V12s, ranging from 6 liters all the way up to 7 liters in displacement, featuring Cosworth forged connecting rods, a new crank, modified cylinder heads, larger valves, an upgraded fuel injection system with 4 new injectors, and better throttle bodies to help fuel the incredibly thirsty V12s. Because of the low production numbers and the different variations that were made, it's hard to pinpoint the exact power range for all of them. But what I can find in reference is that at a base level, output shot up to a staggering 496 horsepower and 500 foot-pounds of torque in the top trim naturally aspirated variants. Now that was sent through a toughened 5-speed Getrag manual gearbox. In a world where a stock XJS Jag made 260 or so horsepower with the 5.3-liter V12, this Lister power bump was extraordinary. It was a completely different car now, and it now slotted up against some of the fastest cars in the world. And get this, these cars got even faster. To handle the power of these bigger V12s, Lister installed a completely new suspension setup with Coney dampers that were much more tuned for performance driving rather than the relaxed feel for the regular XJS. They also redesigned the rear subframe and suspension to better control axle movements over bumps. Huge 3-piece 17-inch wheels wrapped in massive Pirelli tires, which were 10 inches wide up front and up to 13 inches wide in the rear, filled out the aggressively flared wheel arches, which is the calling card of the special Lister XJSs. It was an unmistakable visual overhaul that added massive side vents and a way fatter stance. But as far as 80s cars go, the body kits on these, dare I say, have aged pretty gracefully, and I really don't think they look gaudy at all, which cannot be said for a lot of the wild 80s super tuner creations. Lister also upgraded the brakes with ventilated discs that were pushed outward in the rear for better cooling, because initially the XJS used inboard mounted rear disc brakes. There was pretty much no stone unturned when it came to Lister modifying these XJSs. Wide body kits, suspension overhauls, built motors, the works. But if the 500 horsepower 5-speed manual version wasn't enough for you, don't worry, because Lister had a final XJS that lived exclusively on kill mode. And these were the Le Mans package cars. With an estimated 20 cars built in this configuration, the Le Mans cars saw the addition of not just one, but 2 superchargers to the already fast 7-liter V12 now, plus the addition of a new exhaust system, which helped free up some airflow. The result of all of this was a power output of 604 horsepower. Guys, this is the 80s to 1990s, mind you. 604 horsepower wasn't just a lot, it was insane. This was a 200 mile per hour plus capable rocket ship, all in Jaguar guise. The rather docile XJS cars that Lister modified were completely different animals, and I really hesitate to call them Grand Tourers anymore because of just how angry these cars were. They have the attitude of a muscle car, but it's wearing a finely woven English suit. In total, it's estimated that Lister worked on about 90 XJS cars to provide varying levels of these conversions to them over the years. And both coupes and convertibles got the Lister treatment. Heck, they even apparently dropped that 604 horsepower twin supercharged V12 into a 4-door Jag as well. But as the XJS moved towards its final years in production, Lister focused its efforts on their own bespoke supercar, the Lister Storm, and their dedicated racing efforts, which would spell the end of the Lister-tuned XJS cars. While the Storm was a successful race car, it wasn't a super successful selling car, and also these Jaguars didn't sell a ton of vehicles either. It was hard to keep a full company afloat with all this going on, only selling a few units a year. As a result, Lister faded away after the Storm, and the company was then relaunched in 2013. Now, they build replicas of the original 50s and 60s Lister race cars, and they also offer high-power conversion options for a few of Jaguar's current models. However, with the recent pivot that Jaguar has decided to make with their questionably designed EV, one can only hope they will backtrack on that pivot so companies like Lister can continue to do what they do best, and that's make the most visceral performance Jaguars out there. Let me know in the comments down below if you think these Lister XJs still look as timeless as I do, or if you think they have aged poorly. I would just love to hear some different opinions. But that just about wraps it up for this video. Sorry there wasn't a ton of information, I just really couldn't find that much out there on this car, and I tried to make do with as best as I had. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, it really helps me out. But otherwise, until next time, enthusiasts.